Hey guys, here for my third video on porting Qmake to Cmake. Hopefully I haven't been too all over the place. They're just so different. It's challenging to try to just smoothly scroll through my files here and see how they correspond. But I'm doing my best to make sure they line up. So I do want to cover a couple things. If you've been looking at my code and sort of scratching your head, and whoa, why aren't you talking about that? So I'm using a library that I'm actually phasing out called Python Qt right now, and it uses PRF files, which are just an extra file format that Qt uses in some places to house settings specific to certain projects. So those are pretty much just other project files that you're pulling in. And you can do the same thing with Cmake. You can call in include and pull in another Cmake list.texts, and it'll run all of the stuff in that file. But what I've done is I pretty much just flattened my whole project into one Cmake. So whereas before I had like a Python Qt.prf where I do a bunch of stuff, now I just do all of that in my Cmake lists. I just wanted to cover that. I did have things sort of nested in my project file, and I figured it would be easier for me to follow along if I just flattened it all into one spot. But I do want to talk about some of the contents of these files in some more detail because I think they're useful to demonstrate some of Cmake's features and how it compares to Qmake. So I have a python.prf here. So think of this as just as an extension of my Qmake project file. What you can do is you can specify which operating system you're running in Qmake, and you can act accordingly. So what this file in Qmake is doing is it's pretty much saying, okay, I'm linking Python. That's what this is doing. It's saying, all right, I have a Python version, and I'm going to set it to a certain value if I don't find it in my environmental variables. So what this is doing in Qmake is saying, all right, I have an environmental variable called Python version. So set a local variable to that and then check its value. And if I'm on Windows, it sets it to 38, and Unix has a different format it's expecting for my Python version. Fair enough, right? And then I'm doing a bunch of stuff with that, depending on whether I'm on Mac or I'm on Windows or I'm on Unix. So how would I do something similar in Cmake? Well, I'll tell you. So environmental variables in Cmake are called with this by prepending env to a variable and then using curly brackets. So if I have an environmental variable named Python version, I would say I would do this. And so what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, if that environmental variable is defined, then set a local variable named Python version to, and by local I'm just meaning like within this Cmake lists.text. Then set it to that environmental variable. So these lines here pretty much correspond to what's going on in these lines. I'm checking the environmental variable, seeing if it's set. And so if it's not set, then I check if I'm in Windows, so that's Win32 in Cmake. You could also do this check, msvc, msys, mingw, and but that is specifically for Windows compilers. So I'm checking for the Windows operating system. And then I'm doing the same thing I was doing in Qmake. I'm setting the Python version to 38, setting it in for a Unix build to 3.8. Notice that, so for Apple in Qmake, I'm checking Mac X. In Cmake, I'm just checking if it's Apple, which will cover a lot more ground than just that. And then to check for Unix, I qualify Unix and not Apple, because Apple does have Unix-based operating systems. And this is for the ones listed here. So this is pulled from Stack Overflow. I don't claim to be, the generator of any of this knowledge, but I like to think I'm good at pulling it all together. Anyway, so then I just put out a message. If I was building with Unix, it would say, all right, I'm setting my Unix Python version. So yeah, that's how it translates over. It's actually, I think, a little bit prettier on the Cmake side. Just, all right, if Windows do this, Apple do this, Unix do this. And then, so that was just this top part. So I just fleshed that out a little bit. I didn't actually give an option for Apple. Then there's this bottom part here where I'm actually doing a bunch of stuff for each operating system. And I've pretty much covered this already. In Qmake, you can say, all right, do something in debug and do another thing in release mode. So I end up doing that down here, just filling out the logic of the rest of that PRF file. And I'm not going to get into the details because I pretty much covered all of these concepts already. But what I do want to mention is just some little miscellaneous here. So I have this file command where I'm converting my environmental variable for my Python path into a more Cmake friendly path. So if you have any paths in your Qmake, so like here I'm just finding my Python include directory, those paths might get resolved nicely in Qt automatically, but they won't in Cmake. So if you have a mix of like forward slashes and other things, you're going to want to resolve that by converting to a Cmake path. And this is a built-in. So this is saying file, all right, convert to a Cmake path, what I find at in the environmental variable Python path, and then put that out into a local variable called env Python path. Forgive the loud motorcycles on my street. I can't do anything about it. All right, and then you can use that path for whatever you want to do. In my case, I'm adding the include directory, finding the actual Python library that I'm linking with, and then doing the actual link in target link libraries. And that all corresponds to what's happening in these lines in the Qmake. One fun thing, I don't know if I even did this right, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. You can make system calls directly in Qmake, and you can make system calls directly in Cmake as well. So system becomes execute process, and I'm not going to go into the details of this because I haven't tested it. But anyway, that's a place to start. And if you read the documentation on execute process, you'll know just as much as I do about that. So what are some other things I might have missed? Because there were some weird things in Qmake that took a little while to figure out how to port over. Okay, so let's say that you have a Qmake project, and in your project file, you have you're pulling in a lot of things. One of them is probably a PRI, or maybe not if you have a smaller project. But if you have a big project, you will be pulling in a PRI, and it might look something like this. It might have a lot of headers and source and resources and other things you're pulling in. I actually had a Python script that I thought I was so clever for making because it walked through my directories and auto-generated this every time I ran my Qmake batch script. So it would just say, okay, here's all the stuff you have in your folders. So don't worry about having to manually modify this every time you create a file. So I thought I was super clever because on some of my work projects, we would spend so much time agonizing about Qmake not building correctly because we forgot to add files to the PRI. So in Qmake, you would have a PRI, and there's not really much of a way of auto-generating that, to my knowledge. And if you're clever, you could whip up a script to do that. Now, while I'm here, you also don't need these in a Cmake. The mock.dir, object.dir, that's all stuff you don't need it. So I had to look, didn't find any answers online about whether you need it or not, but I tested it. You don't. Anyway, not to lose my train of thought. Auto-generating files. You can do that in Cmake, and I would have thought this would be a more broadly advertised feature because it's really powerful and really cool. But you can walk through your source directory and you can find, you can use a regex to find all the files you want and throw them into a Cmake variable. So that's actually what I'm doing here. I am calling file command once again, and I'm saying I want to globally recurse. And I'm going to put the results of that recursion into a variable called my sources, and I'm going to use a relative path, and I'm going to use a path relative to my current Cmake list location, so Cmake source directory, and I'm going to look for anything that matches these regexes, so something that's in an src folder with a CPP extension or with a header extension. So this is going to find all my source and header files. And then I'm also going to look for resources with the QRC extension and UI files in my UI folder with the UI extension. So yeah, once I do all of that, set that up, this will just recurse through, find all of those files, and you can print the result out of this variable with a message, which is what I do, and it'll give you all of that. And once you have all of that, you can just say, okay, when I add my executable, this is when I'm creating my, project.exe, then just add those sources to it and add everything. And so that's how you get it running in Qt. And if I didn't have any libraries added, my Cmake would be very simple. And sorry, I have police going by. It would just be, all right, generate, initialize all the, boilerplate, all the stuff Qt wants, and then just iterate through my files and create that executable. So yeah, this was very powerful because it saves you from having to do all of that PRI stuff. You don't have to add them manually at all. So that really saves a lot of headache. Yeah, so I think that was all the big stuff. Those were all the things that kind of wowed me that I thought were really neat about Cmake that might not have been super intuitive. But, at the end of the day, it took me maybe 2 days to get all of this set up and transferred over. So I'm pretty happy with that. Just scrolling through this as I speak and as the sirens are going by to see if there's anything else that I might have missed or not talked about. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers most of what you'd see in a Qmake file. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please let me know. Hopefully this is useful for you. Yeah, I think that'll do it. Thank you for watching this 3-part series. Hopefully it was a little bit helpful to some people. If not, I do apologize for wasting everyone's time, including my own. But hopefully I didn't. All right, folks, I'm going to go eat some dinner. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.